Chapter 22. G. By nightfall, G was suffering the full effects of being shot. The injection he got for the pain only dulled the razor-sharp edge he felt whenever he moved or even drew a breath. His radio man called for a medical extraction. The request was denied due to the recent loss of several aircraft over U.S. soil. For the time being, the only flights over American territories were those essential to the outcome of their objective. Getting a wounded man off the battlefield did not fit that description. The rally point was a water tower on top of a hill that overlooked the highway to the east, while Petaluma lay to the west. His team huddled in a security circle, waiting when G stumbled up the hill. He was weak from blood loss and overexertion. The tower only served as a link-up spot, and the team quickly moved back toward the city of Petaluma as soon as he was patched up. They passed through a golf course and came to a large property. The home dwarfed the $2 million houses that surrounded it. G lay under a tree by himself as his team moved to the property. They negotiated the 6-foot iron fence that encircled the back of the property and kept toward the rear of the house, weapons held high, scanning and alert. With any luck, the home would be empty, G thought to himself, his fatigued brain wishing for a small reprieve from his recent hardships. A woman's scream informed him he would get no such break, at least not in his immediate future. The sound of an angry man's voice speaking in English echoed across the night-shrouded golf course. G's men shoved a man and woman in their 60s to a small pedestrian gate that led out into the fairway bordering the monstrous property. G struggled to his feet as his men approached with the now silent woman and still protesting man. Before his men could ask for direction, G spoke. "Kill them on the other side of the course." G issued his death order in Korean before smiling at the man and transitioning smoothly to English. "We need the use of your home for a few hours. My men will escort you to the road, and you can find other accommodations for the night." That sent the man into a tirade. "I will not be thrown out of my own house. Do you realize that you're not only trespassing, but you're also scaring the hell out of my wife?" G gave an almost imperceptible bow of his head, followed by a sharp command in Korean. "Kill them both, here." Before the wealthy man could interpret G's body language or the sudden movement of a man to his side, one of the KPA men drew a Czech-made CZ-82 pistol, complete with a suppressor manufactured in North Korea. The weapon was leveled at the man's temple, and the trigger pulled. The weapon belched a 9mm bullet from the suppressor cap. The bullet entered the man's head through his left ear, cavitating its way through his brain in an upward direction before exiting the right side of his skull, above his ear. The man dropped into a heap, his limbs twisted, bent in directions not meant even for a young, athletic man. As his wife drew a breath to scream, a second bullet smashed into her right cheekbone, shattering its way through her facial bone structure and entering her brain. The bullet did not exit as the woman pitched forward, her half-drawn breath blowing out in a grotesque, wheezing sonance as her body folded in on itself. 4 of his men grabbed both corpses by the legs, dragged them 50 yards to a nearby sand trap, and deposited the bodies in it. The natural depression of the course's obstacle would hide their bodies from anyone gazing out across the golf course once the sun rose the following day. Inside the enormous residence, G found a massive study with the largest, most ornate desk he'd ever seen. He sat in a chair behind the desk as 2 of his men, Min Jun and Kija, waited for instructions near the door. "Go to the city manager's house. Kill her and her husband," he instructed. As his men left the office, he spied a bar cart with rows of bottles he held no knowledge of. A Lismore ship's decanter, half full of brown liquid, sat in the center. Next to it were 2 Lismore 8-ounce tumblers. Even though he lacked the knowledge of such extravagant luxuries, he knew the setup was something only the wealthy could afford. Struggling to his feet, he walked to the bar cart and hefted one of the surprisingly heavy tumblers in his good hand, wincing in pain as he did so. The thought of taking a drink crossed his mind, but G quickly pushed it away. He knew dulled senses was a condition in which tragedy could easily slip past his defenses. If this were allowed, it would bring with it its unwanted effects. Replacing the tumbler, he ran a finger down the side of the decanter, wondering what all the previous owner's money had done to protect the man who'd sat in this office. The king of his empire, until an impoverished nation crippled his country and stole his life. The answer was nothing. The man's money had done nothing to protect him, and the man himself had done nothing but blather on about trespassing. Now, he and his wife lay dead in a sand trap G was sure he'd spent time as a golfer trying to stay out of. For a moment, he was jealous of the man who'd lived here and the life he'd enjoyed. Although his country would occupy the man's land and his men had ended the man's life, G himself would go home victorious. But he would also return to the same squalid living conditions he'd left behind before embarking on this venture. He withdrew his hand from the decanter, ashamed of his thoughts. Mindless pondering daydreams such as those failed to serve the supreme leader in any way. They only helped to erode the progress already made in America toward North Korea's great victory. Min Jun and Kija were no strangers to assassination assignments. Both had snuck into South Korea on more than half a dozen missions during their military careers to murder defectors, spies, and even a Western journalist. Without a functioning military force in the area and no law enforcement, the rendition operation might be the easiest either man would ever be tasked with. The KPA men moved swiftly toward Roberta's house. When they were within a mile of their objective, they slowed, taking the time to use the shadows to mask their approach. Roberta's house was in a short court that was home to only 6 residences. Her house sat directly in the center at the far end, making their approach slightly more difficult in that they had to pass the entire length of the court to reach their target. It was late. With little ambient light and absolutely zero man-made light, the 2 killers weren't overly worried about being seen. They slid silently through the darkness toward the Maddox residence like 2 skulking land sharks. Cam and the 3 cops arrived at Roberta's residence just after 2200. The house and the entire neighborhood was dark. Not even a candle burned inside from what he could see. He'd left the gunworks rig back at the warehouse and brought only his pistol and the Daniel Defense M4 rifle, helping him travel faster with less weight. He didn't wait for the 3 other men to follow as he dropped his bike on the front lawn and raced toward the front door. Instinct took over and Cam offset himself as he approached. In the event rounds were fired through the door from inside, they wouldn't hit him if he wasn't directly in front of it. His biggest fear was that he would find the door had been forced open. To his relief, the door appeared completely intact. He tried to peer through the windows, but the blinds were drawn, blocking any view into the home. He motioned for the incoming 3 men to go to the side of the house. As Alex reached him, he leaned into his ear. "Front door isn't damaged. Check the side. I'll check the other and meet you in the back." Without waiting for a response, he leapt around the left side of the house, searching the building's exterior for signs of forced entry. Thankfully, the side and the rear of the house appeared undamaged. "Let's go back to the front and knock," he whispered to the cops. Together, they moved back to the front of the house. Alex knocked on the door, softly at first, and then a little harder until a man's voice answered. "Roger." Roberta's husband, Cam recalled. The voice sounded strained at having to answer the door in the middle of the night with no lights and no way of knowing who was outside. "Tell Roberta it's Alex from the PD." A moment later, they could hear the door being unlocked, and then it opened enough for Roberta to peer through. Her eyes searched the 3 men's faces in almost non-existent light. "Why are you banging on my door in the middle of the night?" Cam stepped forward. "Get my wife, please." Roberta studied him for a moment. "You're Jennifer's husband." She hadn't recognized him in the dark. "I am, ma'am. Can you get her? We need to get you all out of here." Roberta stepped back to open the door wider and motion the men inside. "What's going on?" she asked nervously. Inside, Roger, Jen, and Cam's children stood in the dark shadows of the living room. He rushed to his wife and kids and wrapped them in a tight hug. It had only been a short time since he left them, but the lack of foresight caused him to feel lucky they hadn't been harmed. "We think the Koreans might put all this together and send a team over here to deal with you. Killing civilians is nothing to them," Cam informed the group. "Where are we going?" Roberta asked, puzzlement creasing her tired features. These cops are taking all of you to the warehouse where Mike and his guys have been staying. The Koreans don't know about it, so it'll be safe for now."
"And you?"
Jen whispered. Both cops looked at him with the same expression Jen's tone conveyed. Yeah, what about you?" Alex asked with a confused frown. Cam's nostrils flared as he prepared for a fight with his wife, possibly followed by a fight with the KPA soldiers. "I'm just going to lay up in the neighborhood and see if these guys really do come. I'm not here to fight any of them, just to watch, and then I'll get back to the warehouse." Although Jen didn't pressure him with words, Cam could feel her icy stare as she gathered Taylor and Layla and got them ready to move to yet another unfamiliar place. He kissed both kids, but stopped short when Jen's steely stare warned him he'd likely lose a set of lips if he tried putting them anywhere near her teeth. Surprisingly, neither Roberta nor her husband made a fuss about leaving their home in the dark of night. They both packed quickly, stuffing a few personal items in a single duffel that Roger carried. They exited the house, following the two heavily armed police officers. Cam figured it was a conditioning thing. The police said it was time to go, and you went. End of story. Or maybe it was the threat of being murdered in their sleep by men from a hostile country that made the couple so cooperative. He watched the seven leave from inside the Maddox residence. When they rounded the corner and were no longer visible, he got to work. He found a small bookcase with 4 shelves, roughly 3 feet across, and collapsed it by pushing his weight into the case at an angle. He worked the shelves apart, one at a time, until he had 4 3-foot lengths of pine. In the kitchen, he found a cupboard with a dozen wine glasses inside and took 4 to rig with the shelves against the entry doors. Cam balanced the stem of a wine glass on the top edge of a board, then leaned the glass back against the door. If anyone pushed the door inward, the glass would dislodge and drop to the ground, alerting Cam to the presence of anyone inside the Maddox home. He rigged the first 3 against the front door, rear door, and the door leading in from the garage. The last board and glass combination he placed against the master bedroom door. If the KPA soldiers breached one of the 2 large sliding glass doors on the side patio and entered through the master bedroom, they'd get a hell of a surprise when they entered the main portion of the residence. The setup wouldn't injure or even deter the Koreans, but it would tell him they were at the house if he didn't see them arrive. Moving back to the rear door, he slid a medium-sized window open and climbed through. From the outside, he closed the window, listening for the click that indicated the spring-loaded lock had re-engaged. Now, he'd do what snipers did. Wait, be bored, and remain vigilant. If the Koreans returned to Roberta's house, their arrival would tell him these dudes were not to be taken lightly. He moved through Roberta's backyard and climbed the fence between her neighbor's house to the right when facing it from the street. He used an old aluminum ladder lying in the tallish grass on the side of the neighbor's house to gain access to the neighbor's roof. A large evergreen tree grew next to the residence, its branches resting on the home's roof, undoubtedly doing nothing for the integrity of the shingled rooftop. After what seemed like hours, Cam began to think that maybe the Koreans were off licking their wounds. Maybe they were satisfied with letting the traitorous city manager be for now. That changed in the blink of an eye when the faint tinkling of breaking glass on hard-tiled floor reached his ears. He was positioned to watch the front and right side of the house, or numbers 1 and 4 sides. He couldn't see the rear of the house where he was sure the sound emanated from. He felt a surge of excitement rush through his body as he imagined the frustration the man who had caused the noise must feel. Cam smiled grimly, knowing the other Koreans in the group were probably pissed at their partner. They'd have to turn their little deliberate entry into a more dynamic one, since their presence was no longer a secret. 2 minutes later, 2 KPA men stepped out onto the front porch and scanned the little court. Cam brought his rifle up and aligned the iron sights on the closest man. He hadn't had the chance to attach the Leopold scope, so he was hobbled with his old-school Troy Industries sighting system. His finger hovered over the trigger, and even tugged at it briefly, before pulling the appendage out of the trigger guard. The KPA soldiers were too close, and although he was sure he would be able to down one, the other might start shooting at the house he was on top of. He didn't know if there was a family inside the house, plus there was the chance a round could pass through the home from below and hit him. He was all by his lonesome out here, meaning getting shot was a no-go. Besides, he had no idea how many men he was dealing with. There could be another half-dozen soldiers inside the house waiting while the two team leaders hashed out some logistical issue on Roberta's front porch. He just couldn't be certain, so it was better to play it safe for now. The two KPA men remained in the shadows of the porch for a few minutes, then stepped off together and crossed the front yard. They moved tactically through the front yards of the homes on one side of the street. He covered the men's departure, a snarl growing inside him as he thought of what these animals would have done to his precious Layla, or little Taylor, not to mention Jen. The men were nearly 40 yards out when he told himself, "Screw it," and wrapped his index finger around the trigger again. The receding men were nothing more than dark forms in the night as their rhythmic movement carried them farther from his rooftop perch. Before he lost sight of the two KPA men, Cam drew the slack in on the M4 and fired. After Kija knocked over the wine glass while forcing his way through the back door of their target's house, Mi-jun gave a terse order to clear the house quickly. Both men knew that meant kill anyone inside, man, woman, or child. When they found the residence empty, Mi-jun moved to the front porch. Kija joined him, covering the street while Mi-jun called G to advise him of the dry hole they'd hit. They received an order to return to the house next to the golf course and rejoin what was left of their team. Mi-jun assumed point and began to pick his way through the front yards of the neighboring houses, moving out of the court. Without power, the world was a silent and sometimes spooky place. In one respect, it was good because Mi-jun would have heard if anyone was approaching. The downside was he also made audible noise in the quiet still of the new America. The deafening roar of a single rifle shot caused a litany of chemicals to be released into Mi-jun's brain and bloodstream. His mind communicated to his muscles in the 1/100th of a second that it took for his body to react as it had been trained to. Fear battered his brain, but the bastions of training held the emotion at bay. Next came confusion and curiosity, which Mi-jun allowed to course freely through his body as he dropped and rolled toward the front of the nearest house, taking a split second to search for muzzle flashes as he tumbled to the side. He registered no flashes, but continued to roll, knowing a moving target was substantially more difficult to hit than a stationary one. When Mi-jun was safely between two houses, he stole a single look back and saw Kija's body slumped on the lawn like a discarded bag of turnips. Turning, he never looked back as his legs pumped, driving his body forward and away from the thing that had caused Kija's wife to suddenly become a widow. If he'd seen muzzle flashes, Mi-jun could have returned fire or even maneuvered on the shooter's position. But a single shot in the middle of the night with no follow-up shots unnerved the KPA assassin. He absconded from the neighborhood like a hunted animal.